You smell it before you see her. A dense, suffocating stench that clings to the air like rot to bone. It seeps through stone walls, through silken curtains, through prayer-soaked corridors. It makes you stop breathing, but not soon enough. The scent isn't just filth. It's the kind of odor that makes men weep and priests cross themselves. Heavy. Human. Unholy. Your boots echo down the marble hallway, but the closer you get, the more the world feels wrong. The air thickens. Candles flicker and recoil. The tapestries hang stiff with mildew, as if even the fabric is trying to escape. The guards at her door keep their distance, faces pale, eyes hollow. They don't speak. They've learned silence is safer. No one touches the handle. They use a cloth. And even then, their hands shake. Inside, the queen sits, motionless. She's wrapped in velvet and fur, but the richness means nothing now. The fabric is yellowed. Stiff. Slick in places where sweat and waste have merged into permanent stains. Beneath it all, beneath the jewels and crowns and divine symbols, she is wearing the same undergarments she wore the day she was married. Not changed. Not washed. Not removed. Years have passed. Her throne is no longer a seat of power, it is a nest of decay. Flies dance above her, drawn by a scent the court no longer dares to name. The floor beneath her has darkened. The dog at her feet whimpers, bones visible through mangy fur, yet refuses to leave her side. She pets it absently, her fingernails caked with something dark and old. You want to look away. You want to run. But you can't. Because this is the queen. She is sacred. She is divine. And she is rotting before your eyes. Her courtiers whisper of visions. Of demons. Of curses woven into flesh. But none speak too loud. No one questions her directly. Power like hers does not tolerate questions. And then the fever began. 1 servant. Then 2. Then 7. Sweating. Bleeding. Dying. The physicians speak in riddles. The priests begin to fast. The midwives flee. But her chambers remain untouched. When the sickness spilled beyond the palace walls, when children began coughing in the streets and noblemen buried wives by candlelight, no one dared accuse her, not openly. Yet behind closed doors, there were whispers, she brought it. She summoned it. The queen has never changed her clothes. And now the land is dying with her. They say the plague began in the streets. They are wrong. It began in her silence. It began in her skin. And as the kingdom began to rot from within, the people asked themselves the only question that mattered: was this madness, or punishment? Or something far, far worse? Her name was Juana. Juana of Castile. Daughter of Isabella of Spain, yes, that Isabella, the queen who funded Columbus and drove the last Muslim king from Granada. Juana was born beneath banners soaked in war, christened in the blood of empire, and raised to be nothing short of divine. But divinity can be a prison. And Juana's prison had no walls, only eyes. She was a Habsburg. A thread in Europe's most twisted and tangled tapestry of royal blood. A lineage built on crowns, cousins, and holy alliances, stitched together by marriages and madness. Her blood carried the weight of centuries, and with it, the darkness that often hides in inbreeding, in expectation, in royal perfection stretched too thin. When she was young, they called her Juana la Bella, Juana the Beautiful. The court praised her high cheekbones and solemn eyes, her poise, her grace, her divine presence. They said she walked like a queen even before she wore the crown. But they did not speak of what they saw when she thought she was alone. They did not speak of the girl who flinched at baths, who hated the sound of water hitting stone, who winced when maids undid the laces of her gown. In public, she shimmered in gold and rubies. Her hair was threaded with silver lace. Her shoes were hand-stitched by monks sworn to silence. But beneath the brocade was cotton yellowed with sweat, linen stiff with old blood, undergarments fused to skin. Some said the cloth had grown into her flesh, like bark over old wounds. She refused to change. Not once. Not when she was crowned Queen of Castile. Not when she married Philip the Handsome of Burgundy. Not even when she gave birth, 7 times. The midwives wept. The doctors begged. The priests whispered of purification and penance. But Juana would not bend. The body, she said, was sacred. To expose it, even to clean it, was to desecrate it. And so, she stayed wrapped in her self-imposed sanctity. What the people saw was a queen draped in splendor, ruling over the richest lands in Europe. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't smell, was the ruin beneath. She was the emblem of Christian monarchy, the symbol of a unified Spain, the mother of future emperors. But in her chambers, beneath perfumed sheets and velvet drapery, history was rotting. And no one, not her ladies, not her confessors, not her husband, could bear to touch her. At Disturbing Tale, we dig up what others bury. If you're not subscribed yet, ask yourself, why are you still watching Royal Rot without pressing that button? Or drop into the comments and tell us why the truth makes you uncomfortable. She believed the body was a temple, but one that should never be disturbed. To bathe was to strip away the divine covering God had laid upon her skin. To peel off her garments was to open herself to corruption, to impurity, to evil that slipped through steam and soap like a serpent through tall grass. Juana's refusal wasn't laziness. It wasn't vanity. It was doctrine. She believed that to remain clothed, always, endlessly, was to preserve the sacred. Her flesh was not hers to uncover. It was God's. Touched only by birth, death, or holy matrimony. Anything in between was desecration. But beliefs like these, they are not born. They are carved. Her marriage to Philip the Handsome was not one of love, it was obsession disguised as duty. She adored him, clung to him, followed him like shadow to flame. He tolerated her at first. Then mocked her. Then abandoned her, again and again. When he returned from affairs, smelling of other women, Juana didn't rage. She watched. Quiet. Tense. And then refused to remove the garments she wore when he left. As if keeping them on would preserve the moment he still belonged to her. What began as grief calcified into ritual. And then into madness. Juana stopped letting her maids undress her. She began sleeping in her robes. Then her petticoats. Then the same shift for weeks. When one servant tried to change her by force, Juana struck her across the face with a crucifix. The court was torn. Some said she was devout, so holy she feared flesh. Others whispered darker things. That she had gone mad from childbirth. That she spoke to shadows. That she heard voices from beneath the floorboards. Doctors requested to examine her. She refused. Priests came to bless her. She hissed at them. Her own mother sent letters, urging her to purify the body lest the soul decay. Juana burned them without reading. One ambassador from the Low Countries described the queen's presence as radiant but rancid. Another wrote to his king, "She wears the crown with majesty, but the air curdles where she stands. It is as if her soul is leaking from her skin." There were rumors that the maids no longer entered her room alone. That they brought vinegar-soaked rags to hold against their noses. That one fainted upon lifting the hem of her dress. But still, she refused. Day after day, the rot deepened. Not just in her clothing, but in her mind. Her rituals grew stranger. She began speaking to the dead. She kept locks of Philip's hair in a box beneath her pillow. She refused to eat meals unless they were placed on a crucifix-shaped tray. And always, always asterisk, she remained wrapped in the same garments. The same layers. The same odor. A queen embalming herself while still alive. There are moments in history when madness is not loud, it is quiet. Ritualized. Reverent. And clothed in silk. And Juana was the silence that poisoned the air. At Disturbing Tale, we don't clean up history. We let it rot in your ears until you can smell the past. If you haven't subscribed yet, maybe ask yourself, what are you afraid of uncovering? And if you refuse, speak in the comments. Tell us why some truths should stay buried. It began with coughing. A servant boy, no older than 12, collapsed outside the queen's chamber with a blood-flecked handkerchief clutched in his fist. By morning, his skin had turned a bruised shade of violet. By nightfall, he was dead. Then came the chambermaid. She had been with Juana for 3 years. Silent. Loyal. Trusted. She vanished without announcement. Gone. The guards claimed she fled the palace. The maids whispered she never made it past the chapel. Another girl was sent to replace her. She lasted 2 days. After that, they stopped assigning replacements. Juana's quarters became a void. A sealed world of muffled footsteps and gagging breath. The heavy oak doors, once carved with saints, now stood closed at all hours. The air grew colder. The walls dampened. And still, she sat. Still clothed in decay. Still untouched. Still divine in name and rancid in presence. One by one, those who lingered near her fell sick. A footman lost his vision. A noblewoman collapsed mid-conversation, bleeding from her ears. A page boy's skin split open from fever blisters. The court tried to pretend. They issued declarations blaming seasonal vapors. They summoned priests for blessings. They burned incense by the barrel. But the scent of something far more ancient, more natural, overwhelmed it all. Rats began to appear. At first, a few. Scratching beneath the stone floors. Then more. Bolder. Clawing through tapestries. Chewing at bread left outside her door. Gathering in corners, eyes black and wet, watching. When the priests came to bless the queen's chambers, they found the rats had already gnawed through one of the wooden saints above her door. A court physician finally broke. He wrote in his journal, "I do not know if this illness comes from her body or the silence around it. But the smell in her chamber is death itself. I have inhaled the breath of corpses less foul." The physicians stopped coming. The servants carried wax under their tongues to keep from vomiting. Some claimed they saw shadows moving behind the queen's bed at night. One maid insisted she saw something crawl from under the mattress, a black thing, glistening and limbless. And Juana, she remained still. Still robed. Still holy. Still untouched. The infection did not stay confined. It moved from her wing to the kitchens. From the kitchens to the chapel. Then out through the gates. And all the while, the people asked, why is the queen not seen in public? Why do her guards wear cloth across their mouths? Why do the windows of her wing drip with mildew when it hasn't rained for weeks? Behind the walls, the court knew the answer. They didn't speak it. But they knew. Imagine working for a queen whose chambers reeked of rot. Would you survive it? If this is the first you're hearing of this horror, you owe it to yourself to subscribe. And if you won't, be honest in the comments. Tell us why you'd rather look away. It took just 19 days. 19 days from the first boy who coughed blood outside her chamber to the death of a duke's wife, found curled in her bed, her mouth locked open in a final scream. By then, the infection had leapt the boundaries of service. It was no longer confined to those who carried trays and chamber pots. Now it wore silk. Now it signed decrees. Now it gave orders with trembling hands and bloodshot eyes. The first noble to fall was Don Enrique de Aragon. A man of 50 winters, strong and careful, known for never entering the Queen's wing. He died slumped across the royal chapel's pew, his skin darkened like bruised fruit. 3 boils bloomed across his neck before the last hour. One burst. The priest who gave him final rites vomited at the altar. 2 days later, the minister of grain collapsed mid-council. His lips blackened. His eyes rolled. They say he clawed his own throat before the end, as if trying to tear the plague out of his lungs. The room emptied before his body hit the floor. They left his corpse on the flagstone for 2 nights because no one dared drag it away. The symptoms followed a pattern, cruel in its consistency. It began with heat, fevers that boiled the blood and blistered the skin. Then came the swellings, buboes the size of eggs, beneath the arms, between the legs, behind the ears. Purple at first. Then black. Then ruptured. The stench was unbearable. And then came the bleeding. Nose, mouth, eyes, until the body gave up its last breath in a gurgle of red foam. The palace turned cold with fear. Masses were held hourly. Bells tolled like hammers against stone. Religious leaders took to the halls with incense and relics, holding up crucifixes as if they could stop something older than Scripture. They spoke of judgment. Of wrath. Of sins brought home to roost. But behind closed doors, many stopped blaming sin. They blamed her. The Queen. She who had not washed in years. She who wore the same shift she had bled in from childbirth. She whose rooms stank worse than the plague itself. Whose skin had not seen sunlight, nor water, nor the bare breath of the world in over a decade. The royal physicians, once united in silence, began to fracture. One, a man of logic and fear, begged her. Pleaded for her to bathe. To change her clothes. To burn them. To save what was left of the court. He offered oils, prayers, remedies crafted from vinegar and rose water. She laughed. Said water opened the soul to demons. The other physicians didn't argue. They left. Vanished from court in the dead of night, some taking only their crucifixes and horses. One left a letter nailed to the chapel door: the pestilence is not God's wrath. It is her. Her skin. Her breath. Her filth. May he forgive us for letting her live this long. The staff dwindled. Food was no longer served on silver trays but tossed through doorways like offerings to a beast. The palace gates were closed to outsiders. The stench of the interior reached the outer courtyards. Birds stopped landing on the roof. Cats vanished. And the townspeople began to whisper. First among themselves. Then in the markets. Then to the soldiers who still patrolled the palace walls. They did not ask questions. They made statements. She's cursed. She's rotting the land from within. Our queen is the plague. Children made rhymes in the streets, singing about a lady in red who never washed her head and made the nobles bleed to death. No one laughed. The court was now a tomb sealed with velvet curtains and royal seals. And at its center, she still sat. Unwashed. Unchanged. Unmoved. The same woman. The same robes. The same silence. Still queen. Still sovereign. Still death. If this is what royalty smells like when it rots, then what does loyalty look like when it obeys? At Disturbing Tale, we uncover the things history tried to deodorize. If you've made it this far and you still haven't subscribed, maybe you're more comfortable with the version they told you in school. But if you're not afraid of rot, join us. And if you are, speak now in the comments. Tell us why you'd rather forget what she became. She was no longer just a woman. She was an emblem. A warning. A rotting statue propped up in the center of a dying empire. Her body, once wrapped in silks and reverence, had decayed into metaphor. Juana was no longer seen, only sensed. And what she represented lingered far longer than her footsteps ever did. She had become the body politic. And the body was festering. Word of the queen's condition leaked beyond palace walls, seeping into court gossip, then letters, then sermons. Nobles in foreign courts whispered of the queen of stench, of the corpse on the throne. Paintings of her ceased. No new coins were struck with her image. When dignitaries arrived, they were not taken to greet her, but to sign treaties under the supervision of her council, whose eyes were gray with shame. And still, she remained. Her stillness was power. Her decay, absolute. And those who ruled in her name did so with the odor of her silence trailing behind every decree. Opponents within the empire began to weaponize her condition. The Protestants in the north called her a papist idol of disease. The French mocked Spain's queen of rot. Even inside her own kingdom, whispers took on a new edge, not just horror, but revolt. If the queen won't wash, why should we obey? They began to gather at the palace gates. Not by the hundreds. By the thousands. Mothers carrying sick children. Widows with black veils. Farmers with plague scars on their faces, pressing their foreheads to iron bars and demanding to know why the royal household still lived while their villages burned their dead in mass pits. And still, she sat. She would not appear. Would not speak. Would not cleanse. Some claimed she was already dead, mummified in fabric and incense, ruled now by ghosts and rodents. But others swore they saw her, just once, a pale face in the window, framed by shadow, unmoving and eternal. Her refusal to change, to wash, to yield, was no longer personal. It was national. And the smell of that stubbornness drifted into every corner of the realm. History has never been kind to monarchs who stank. King Louis the unclean. Tsar Feofr the fragrant. Caligula, whose bedchambers were scrubbed daily yet whose breath could fell a servant. But none of them ruled through scent alone. None of them weaponized filth the way Juana did. Because by refusing to clean herself, she refused to allow them to wash away the truth. She held up a mirror, smeared in her own decay, and forced the empire to stare. At its corruption. At its disease. At its helpless, blind loyalty to a throne that no longer cared if it reeked. This isn't just a story of filth. It's the story of what happens when the powerful rot from the inside out. If that doesn't shake you, maybe Disturbing Tale isn't for you. But if it does, subscribe. If it doesn't, go to the comments. Explain why you'd rather stay clean than see the dirt. They sealed her away like a relic. Not to be worshipped, only to be forgotten. The order came without ceremony. One morning, the guards changed. The priest who once read her verses by candlelight was reassigned. The maids were dismissed without explanation. The tapestries in her wing were taken down, burned in the gardens behind the chapel. And she, still crowned, still swaddled in the same rotting folds of linen and velvet, was moved to a corner of the castle no one visited anymore. A tower built for storms. Damp. Narrow. Soundless. Her exile was not public. No one announced it. But everyone felt it. A queen without a court. A ruler without rule. A body in a room with no audience. She was no longer feared. She was forgotten. Even her own blood abandoned her. Her daughter, young, devout, groomed for diplomacy, refused to enter the room. Declared before the council, "My mother is unclean, in spirit and in body. I will not risk contamination." The physicians who once feared her power now wrote prescriptions for her without ever seeing her. No one delivered them. She was left alone, wrapped in cloth fused to her skin, surrounded by the filth of her own design. When the end came, no one noticed. Not at first. The guard outside her door reported silence. Then more silence. Then a smell, different than before. Sweeter. Thicker. The door was opened on the third day. What they found inside has never been fully recorded. Some say she was seated upright, lips parted as if mid-prayer, eyes blackened by rot. Others claim she was curled on the floor, one hand stretched toward the window, clawed fingers tangled in a curtain string. The linen around her was soaked, dark, moving with insects. The stench drove one of the guards to vomit in the hallway. Her body was not bathed. It could not be. The garments she wore had long become her second skin. They removed her in parts, using gloves, blades, and silence. The bedding was burned. The room was scrubbed, then boarded, then sealed. And no one ever slept in that wing again. But legends are not so easily buried. They say her spirit lingers. Not with rage, but with presence. That sometimes, in the highest halls of the old fortress, you can still smell it. Not decay. Not death. But something older. Something forgotten. The stench of a body no longer afraid of the living. There are places in this world where silence rots, and women like Juana are entombed not in marble, but in memory. And once you breathe her in, you never forget her. At Disturbing Tale, we don't chase the myths that comfort us. We exhume the ones that stain. If you've stayed with us this far and still haven't subscribed, ask yourself, what are you running from? And if you can't bring yourself to click, confess in the comments. Let the ghost of truth drag it out of you. The plague did not die with her. It moved outward, like breath exhaled from a long-held chest. From the castle walls into the winding alleys of Castile. From the kitchens into the stables, from the stables into the villages, from the villages into the provinces, until whole townships carried the stain of a queen they had never seen. Children died in their sleep, their mouths leaking red. Midwives collapsed mid-delivery. Graves overflowed and were left open, the scent of rot indistinguishable from the scent of morning. Some whispered that she had cursed the land with her final breath. Others believed she had been a vessel. A walking chalice of judgment, sent not to rule but to ruin. And still, the question clawed at the silence she left behind, was it her? Had the filth of her chambers, unwashed, unchallenged, untouched, spawned the sickness that swept through the kingdom? Did disease begin in her garments, in the fibers of her old blood, in the nesting of rats beneath her velvet skirts? Or was she simply the face of something older, deeper, an empire that had gone too long without questioning its own reflection? Historians cannot agree. Some dismiss the rumors as superstition. They point to fleas, trade ships, climate. They speak of bacteria and famine. They show maps, not ghosts. But others linger longer on the facts that don't belong on charts. The pattern. The timeline. The silence. They talk of the way her illness mirrored the state's. How her mental decay followed the empire's moral one. How the refusal to cleanse, to confront the truth, wasn't limited to her flesh, but threaded through the ruling class like mildew in cloth. They speak of her not as a patient, but as a symbol. A walking omen. A sacred warning in human form. The palace, after her death, was emptied. Its floors scraped. Its linens burned. Its walls repainted and rebelist. Smoke filled the hallways, incense, herbs, vinegar boiled in cauldrons. A priest stood in her former chambers for 3 days, refusing food, chanting psalms until his lips cracked. On the third night, he emerged trembling and pale. He would not speak of what he saw. But he left behind a single sentence in his journal, scrawled in broken Latin: "The demon has been cast out, but not forgiven." The windows of her tower were bricked shut. The room was never reopened. And still, on cold nights, when the wind turns through the castle ruins and the walls remember the weight of breath, you can hear it. Not a voice. Not a moan. A sound like fabric peeling from flesh. Slow. Wet. Eternal. She died without redemption. Her memory reeks. If you watched this far and still won't subscribe to Disturbing Tale, maybe the rot wasn't in her court. Maybe it's in your courage to face darkness. If not, go vent in the comments. We'll be reading. Her name is rarely spoken in classrooms. Not because she was unimportant, but because she was inconvenient. History prefers its queens radiant, tragic, or victorious. Not festering. Not forgotten. Not buried in the same garments she was crowned in. And so, Juana of Castile lives on not in footnotes, but in whispers. In the cracks between facts. In the silence after the lesson ends. In the stories that begin with a shudder and end with a closed door. Her chamber was never reopened. Not by scholars. Not by skeptics. Not even by kings. The bricks remain. Smooth and gray, like the skin of something dead too long to identify. No plaque. No candle. No mention on the official tour. But the guards won't walk past it after dark. And the cleaning staff leave a small offering of salt near the threshold. No one tells them to. They just do. Some say the stone beneath that wing never warmed again. That nothing grows in the patch of soil beneath her window. That every child born within earshot of the palace develops fevers before their first birthday. To the locals, it is not history. It is heritage. A curse passed through generations like a bruise under royal skin. Farmers still spit twice when they speak her name. Mothers warn daughters not to sleep in their clothes. Old women say that cleanliness protects the soul, but madness comes clothed in lace. In academic halls, her name appears only when discussing hysteria, melancholia, royal seclusion. But even there, her case is an outlier. A queen whose rot was not symbolic, but physical. Whose madness did not whisper, it reeked. She became the blueprint for warning. A name used to frighten disobedient girls. A cautionary tale whispered to future queens. A question left hanging in the air: what happens when the most powerful woman in the kingdom refuses to be touched, seen, or washed? She is remembered not by what she did, but by what she refused to undo. And in that refusal, she lives on. Not in gold or marble, but in rot. And shadow. And the sickly sweet scent of a forgotten throne. At Disturbing Tale, we don't preserve legacies. We exhume them. If you've stayed with us through the stench, through the silence, through the sealed doors they never teach you to knock on, subscribe. And if you won't, leave a mark in the comments. Let us know what you're still afraid to touch. What does it take to kneel before a monster? Not the kind with claws. Not the kind with fangs. But the kind that wears a crown, sits on a velvet throne, and smells like the end of the world. Would you have bowed to her? Would you have pressed your lips to the hem of a gown soaked in years of sweat, waste, and memory? Would you have sworn loyalty with a nose full of rot, eyes watering, stomach turning? Or would you have looked away, and risked your head for the insult? Because power does not need perfume. It does not need polish. It needs silence. And in Juana's court, silence was law. No one corrected her. Not the clergy. Not the physicians. Not her family. Not even history. Because when a ruler stands above the law, even as her skin peels, even as her scent sickens, no one speaks. No one dares. And so, the rot spreads. Not just through flesh. Through the system. Through tradition. Through generations of servants taught to obey even when obedience leads to disease. Decay, you see, does not begin with dirt. It begins with deference. It begins with fear. It begins when we stop speaking the truth, because the truth smells too strong to bear. She ruled without washing. And centuries later, history still can't cleanse her. Her stench may have faded. Her body may be dust. But her story, it lingers. Heavy. Rancid. Holy. At Disturbing Tale, we don't sanitize the past. We exhume it. If you made it this far and still haven't subscribed, ask yourself, why witness this and stay silent? Drop a comment. Confess your reason. Or press that button, and never look away again. 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 Again.